premises are hard to see, and that is just fine with me. Modus ponens is the plan. Serve you logic, I am
The converted man here.
Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today we're going to revisit the definition of atheism as a lack of belief in God, specifically to look at why it's so controversial.
Controversial? Really? Who's having this debate? Like, it must be discussed all the time between atheists then. Wait, nope. Nobody's doing that.
As you may recall, Antony Flew first proposed changing the definition of atheism to lack of belief from its traditional definition of one who denies God in his 1976 essay, The Presumption of Atheism. You can see the traditional definition in the words etymology, atheosism, atheos meaning without God, and the ism suffix denoting a belief system. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong in changing a definition. All definitions are just an agreement that a given symbol, in this case a word, should be used to point to a particular referent. That is, any word can mean anything you all agree it does.
Wait a minute. What did you just say that the definition was?
Atheosism. Atheos meaning without God, and the ism suffix denoting a belief system.
Right, so without theism, belief in God. So without a belief in God. So the dude that you're talking about is not changing the definition at all. If anything, he's just clarifying it. Now, there are a number of definitions that are different if you look up atheists online. Now, Webster's has an interesting version, which seems to be more like what he's talking about. But there's other definitions that don't have that. They actually say without belief. Why? Well, Webster actually was a pretty big Christian. So when he made the dictionary, he might have had some ideas about what atheism was. Now, it's been a while and that guy is dead, so why we don't update it is a question I can't necessarily answer. Maybe the Webster people is still owned by Christians, or maybe nobody's noticed it or pointed it out, or I don't know, any number of possibilities. But nonetheless, no, we're not changing the definition at all. So that's not true, what you're saying.
And that second one is why atheism as lack of belief is so controversial. If atheism merely denoted a psychological state, which might in fact be common between the atheist and a dead rat, no one would much care.
Belief or non-belief requires the ability to believe or not believe in the first place. Inanimate objects, dead animals, plants, etc., would not possess this ability, nor would a human that has not yet achieved a level of consciousness to be able to decide one way or the other. A baby is not an atheist, but it's also not a theist. Neither one of these words is applicable to the baby, because it cannot believe and it cannot not believe. It has no beliefs at all, one way or the other. Nor does it not have beliefs. In order to lack a belief in something, you have to be able to believe that something is, which a baby, a rock, and a dead rat cannot. It's not that complicated. Stop going off on red herrings.
Unless I suppose one wanted to date the atheist or keep the rat as a pet. But merely lacking a belief isn't what lack of belief atheists actually mean. They only talk about lacking a belief to distract from the positive assertion they've learned to say quickly and quietly. That in default of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, one should assume atheism in the old sense.
Ah, yes, the classical, the old definition of atheism, that there is no God. Because that's what they meant, even though that's totally not what they meant, and what no atheist has really ever said. Like, maybe there's a couple of counterexamples, but by and large, no. And even when the atheist does say that there's no God, it's sort of the same category as saying there are no goblins, ogres, or dragons. At least from the atheist perspective. That is to say, the skeptical perspective. Unless I'm given empirical evidence or repeatable tests or a logically coherent argument, I must be skeptical of whatever the bleep it is. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's true, but I don't have any compelling reason to think that's the case. And I don't have to investigate any further. I can remain skeptical until I have one of those three things. Now, the claim is not that we should say there's no God and that this is the default. But until you introduce the concept of God, the person is probably not going to think that there is such a thing. Now, there will be and can be a person that will come along and come up with or invent a God idea of some sort. This happens independently and can happen suddenly. It can happen isolated or within a group. The reason it happens is usually because we're pattern-seeking creatures and we look for patterns in things, and then we think that there are patterns in things, and sometimes there are patterns in things, and sometimes there isn't. And sometimes the reason why we make gods is because we want to control the environment, or we want to feel like we have control over the environment. This is why we see, say, Native Americans doing a rain dance. But that ceremony becomes important separated from the fact that it doesn't help bring rain. It doesn't matter that the dancing will not produce rain. What matters more now is the ceremony. And in order to continue the ceremony, the belief that it may influence the rain is seen as therefore important. Now, that's completely independent of whether or not there really is a God or whether or not the rain dancing does affect the weather because of the genetic fallacy. Just because we know and understand that humans invent things for reasons, that does not necessarily mean that God is one of those things. But until we have reason to think otherwise, we should maintain the skeptical position in doubting. Now, some people don't want to, or they can't because of brain chemistry or what have you. Perhaps they were raised with this belief. Perhaps it's a cherished belief. Perhaps it's something that literally, because of the way their brain is made, they cannot challenge. Or perhaps challenging it would cause mental distress, or any other number of potential issues, which is also independent from whether there is or is not a God. Just because we can and or do have mental issues does not negate nor necessitate a God. It is a separate and removed thing. But given the data at hand, we have sufficient cause to doubt. And the position of doubt is not one that we question in other regards, only in this regard. Surely this person doesn't want to argue for the flip side of this, that instead of doubting that there is something until you're being given evidence of it, to believe that there's something in spite of evidence being given for it. Surely that isn't what the case is, unless that is what the case is that he's trying to make. I'm not sure. But if I'm to reductio ad absurdum him and reverse this and say, okay, so we should not believe in God until we're given a reason. So then we should believe in God even without a reason, or we should believe in God until we're given a reason not to? Or what does it mean exactly? Because you're not telling me what it means, so I'm guessing here. But all those questions really don't matter because we're too busy constructing an ad nauseum straw man. Let's get back to that, shall we?
That is, until one has been convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that God exists, one should assume that God does not exist. I'll discuss how reasonable this is in a minute. Spoiler alert, it's not.
So, don't believe in X until you're convinced beyond a shadow of doubt. That's bad. Let's do the opposite. Believe in X until you get evidence that it's false. Hey, I believe that there's a bridge ahead of me. I was wrong. I guess now I don't believe. Yeah, no. That's no, and also no. So, no, I don't know what else to say but no to that. Moving on.
But I'd first like to note the subtle move of people who have more or less explicitly adopted a controversial definition of atheism in order to cover for explicitly begging the question. I suspect that this is more accidental than intentional, somewhat evolutionary, where one lack of belief atheist did it and it worked and caught on by imitation, but it's a highly effective rhetorical trick. Put all your effort into defending something not very important, and people will ignore your real weakness. By the way, the phrase beg the question means that you're assuming the answer to the question. It comes from the idea of asking that the question be given to you as settled without having to argue for it. But it's not just assuming your conclusion, it's asking for other people to assume your conclusion too.
Which is why we should be skeptical of anyone's conclusions until they give us empirical evidence, repeatable tests, and or logically coherent argument, and not just assume that it's true until proven false or something, which is what it seems like you're arguing for, but I'm really not sure. All I know is that you're arguing against the idea that we should not believe in something, specifically God, until we're given proof that it exists. So we can't do that because it's just, no, don't do that. Silliness. You see, you're begging the question. You just assume that there's no God, and you want everyone else to assume there's no God. No, because that's really not what they really said. What they really said when they did say anything at all, which we didn't get to in this video because we're too far off on a straw man. But what atheists have traditionally said is that there isn't evidence for this thing that people call God, and so therefore you should doubt it until you're being given evidence. And some people add tests to that, and some people add logically coherent arguments to that, but traditionally it's been just asking for evidence. So no to your ginormous straw man. Get off the straw man!
This is, properly speaking, something only idiots do. For example, oh look, here's a hole in the ground. I'm going to assume it's empty. It might be empty, of course, but in ordinary life, only candidates for the Darwin Awards assume that.
I don't want to go off on a tangent, but by definition, a hole is empty. If it's not empty, then it wouldn't be a hole. But you mean like at the bottom of a hole, which has always had a bottom, because there's no such thing as a bottomless hole as far as we know, unless you're talking about like black holes, but I don't think that those are really holes in the same sense that we're talking about holes. But at any rate, what are you saying? Like you come across a hole and like you go, oh, there's nothing at the bottom, I'm going to jump in. Like, is that what you're saying? Like, no, because that doesn't, you don't assume that it doesn't have nothing in it. Or even if you did assume that there was nothing at the bottom, why would you think that jumping into it would be a good idea then? Like, how far down is it? I assume that I'm going to make that jump and that nothing's going to happen to me based on what? How does that work? Your analogy doesn't work. Anyways, I want to not go off on that tangent, but I did anyways. I regret nothing. Back to the video. I do regret analyzing this video. Back to my regret.
And in fact, taken to its logical conclusion, this default assumption would destroy all exploration. The only possible reason to try to find something is because you think it might be there. If you should act like planets in other solar systems don't exist unless someone has already given you evidence for them, you wouldn't point telescopes at them to see if they're there. That's not acting like they don't exist, that's acting like maybe they exist. In fact, scientific discovery is entirely predicated on the idea that you shouldn't discount things until you've ruled them out. It's also the entire reason you should control your experiments. You can't just assume that other variables besides the ones you're studying had no effect on the outcome of your experiment unless someone proves it to you. You're supposed to assume that other variables do affect the outcome until you've proven that they don't. This principle is literally backwards from good science. Now, examples drawn from science will probably be lost on lack of belief atheists.
Well, since you mentioned science, where's your scientific evidence for God? Oh, right, there isn't any, and we're silly to ask because God, according to most theists, isn't something that you can find through science, except when it is, depending on which apologist you ask. You know, fine-tuning is proof of God somehow, even though fine-tuning isn't what they say it is, and even if it was what they say it was, it still wouldn't prove God because improbable events don't really matter and they happen anyways, so it doesn't prove anything. But okay, it's proof of God if you look at it in a certain way and don't analyze it for logical fallacies or bring in science again, because science is only valid until it's not, because we're doing apologetics. But anyways, I'm sure you totally have scientific evidence for God, otherwise you wouldn't be complaining that these straw man lack of belief atheists that you're complaining about wouldn't understand science or how it works. Otherwise, you're just doing a special pleading for the case of God, which I'm totally sure you're not doing, right? Right? So where's your scientific evidence for God? Let's see that. It's going to be in this video, right? Any moment now. I'm totally sure he's going to have that any moment.
Atheists, who are in general impressively ignorant of how science actually works. But many of them probably own clothes. To buy clothes, one must first find clothes which fit. Until one gets to the clothing store, one doesn't have evidence that they have clothes there, or that if they have clothes, that the clothes they have will fit. Properly speaking, one doesn't even have evidence that the clothes that they sell there will have holes so the relevant part of your body can stick out, like neck holes or leg holes. For all you know, they might lack holes of any kind, just being spheres of cloth. Do any of these atheists assume that the clothes at the clothing store lack holes? Because if they did, they'd stay home, since there's no point in going to a store with clothes that can't be worn. Now, if one is trying to be clever, one could posit an atheist who goes to the store out of sheer boredom to see whether they have any clothes or hippogriffs, or whether the law of gravity even applies inside of the store. But they don't, and we all know that they don't. They reason from things that they know to infer other knowledge, then ignore their stupid principle and go buy clothes.
Your appeal to analogy is fallacious, and here's why. We have examples of clothes and clothing stores, and we've had examples of them. And yeah, based on past experience, we can form our decisions that we make today. And also, kind of, this thing called logic would also work. Logically speaking, a store that calls itself a clothing store would not stay in business very long if it did not cater to a wide variety of individuals. Now, it might be you are too small, or too large, or too tall, or too thin, or too whatever for them to fit you. And if that continues to be the case, then other stores will profit where that store did not, and they will succeed where other stores did not fail, or you might have to special order, etc., etc. But stores typically have some sort of contingency factor for those occasions. It's really rare when they don't, but if they didn't, then I suppose you could always shop online. But before that was available, some people were, kind of hard-pressed. They had to either make clothes themselves or get them special made for an extra amount of money. So, yeah, none of that is like God, so your analogy epically fails, and it's not like you're saying, well, the default position is to not believe in clothes until we see them. I suppose if I've never heard of clothes before because I'm naked or whatever, and you're like, this is clothes. See, I am wearing them. You can put them on. Here's how they function. Here's what they're for. I'd be like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Now I know something I didn't know before. So in that sense, yeah, I would not believe that clothes existed until I was given evidence that they did. But once I had that evidence, then I would, of course, not have to believe because I would know that they exist. On the other hand, if you tell me about the Emperor's new clothes that only smart people can see, and I don't see them, and I'm pretty sure I'm smart, but maybe I'm one of the idiots, I'm going to have to speak up just in case and say, I don't see any clothing!
Now, if you were to point this out to a lack of belief atheist, their response would be some form of special pleading. Special pleading is just the technical name for asking for different evidentiary standards for two things, which aren't different. You should have different evidentiary standards for the existence of a swan and for a law of mathematics, because those are two very different things. Sense experience is good evidence for a swan, but isn't evidence at all for a law of mathematics, which must hold in all possible worlds. Special pleading would be where you say the sense experience suffices for white swans, but not for black swans, or that one witness is enough to testify to the existence of a white swan, but 3 witnesses are required for a black swan. That's the sort of thing special pleading is. And this is what you will find immediately with lack of belief atheists. Their terminology varies, of course, but they will claim that God is in a special category which requires the default assumption of non-existence, unlike most of life.
It's not the atheist or the skeptic that has put God into a special category. That would be the theist. We asked for evidence, and we got, well, I felt God, or I saw God. You did, but I didn't. Well, but I saw God. That's nice. So where is it? Why did you see it and I didn't? I should be able to see it if you saw it. Well, but God showed up for me. It was a special occasion. Why you? Well, I don't know. God just shows me. Why? It's God. It just made that decision. It didn't show up for me, though. I'm not going to believe you until it does. Well, that's special pleading. No, it's not. I'm requiring the same amount of evidence to believe in God as you had. But God soon becomes, and quickly becomes, especially in apologetics, something that moves and runs away from the goalpost. You ask for evidence, you get a personal experience, or you get eyewitness testimony, or you get testimony of eyewitness testimony, or you get written documents that have been changed and altered throughout time, some of which have been shown to be fraudulent, some of which have changed so drastically that the original is lost, most of which have been destroyed either by time or deliberately so that nobody could check in and see what the original copy said, making it extraordinarily easy to pass off this copy as the authoritative copy. We're talking about believing something based on a copy of something that we no longer have, eyewitness testimony that is not even eyewitness testimony, and also being asked to believe that all of this happened in the first place when we know that people can make up stories. There are many stories that people can make up about many things, and those things might be true, but I need the same amount of evidence as those things as anything else. There is no special requirement. I need the same type of evidence. If you have an experience, but I never do, then that's not convincing. Even if I did have an experience, how do I know it's from this particular God? Just having you tell me that it's going to be from this particular God doesn't necessarily mean that you were right. I have an experience of something, and I may or may not know what it is independently. Empirical evidence is observable by multiples of people. And depending on which God we're talking about, we may or may not have anything that even qualifies. Certainly following a pillar of flame through the desert would be awfully compelling for most skeptics. I certainly would be compelled to follow a pillar of flame through the desert, if for nothing else to hope to catch up to the flame and find out what the bleep is maintaining it. If I heard a disembodied voice speak to me, that would be interesting, and it would require further investigation. But you automatically assume that it's God without that study would be unfair to the real God if there is one. Just like if my door opens by itself, do I assume that it was a ghost or an invisible person? No. Because I don't have examples of ghosts or invisible people. That might be the answer, but I don't know until I investigate. And I require that investigation to be done by those presenting me with the idea that it was a ghost or that it was an invisible man that opened my door. Until then, I don't know what opened my door. But it seems reasonable to assume that it's something mundane and ordinary, unless and until I have proof that something else could do it, or that not just that it could do it, but that it exists to be able to do anything in the first place, period. We don't have that for the concepts of God that I'm aware of or that I've studied. Now, I haven't studied all the things and I haven't heard all the things, but that is really ultimately then God's fault for not giving me sufficient evidence to believe in God, which for whatever reason God feels fit to give other people sufficient evidence for their particular God and their particular religion, depending on where they are in life, where they were born, what sort of teachings they grew up with, etc. But for us pesky atheists and skeptics, for whatever reason, God just keeps remaining hidden and won't give us any evidence of any sort at all. We're not the ones who put God into a special category. Either God did that itself or apologists did because they're desperate to hide a non-existent God. I'm not sure which is the case, but I'm waiting for you to prove me wrong.
In my experience, they won't give any reason for why God is in this special category, presumably because there is none, but I think I know why they do it. The special category of things they believe God is in is, roughly, the category of controversial ideas. Lack of belief atheists, all the ones I've met at least, are remarkably unable to consider ideas they don't believe. This is a mark, I think, of limited intellect, and people of limited intellect are remarkably screwed over by the modern world. Unable to evaluate the mess of competing ideas that our modern pluralistic environment presents to everyone, they could get by relying on a mentor, someone older and wiser who can tell them the correct answer until, through experience, they've learned how to navigate the world themselves. And please note that I don't mean this in any way disparagingly. To be of limited intellect is like being short or weak, or, like me, unable to tolerate capsaicin in food. It's a limitation, but we're all finite beings defined, to some degree, by our limits. God loves all of us, and everyone's limits are an opportunity for others to give to them. The strong can carry things for the weak, the tall can fetch things off high shelves for the short, and people who can stand capsaicin can test the food and tell me if it's safe to eat. Limits are simply a part of the interdependence of creation.
Hey, remember when you talked about begging the question? Yeah, good times, right? Why are you doing that now? By saying the word creation, you beg the question. You assume that there is a creation. Oh, well, can't be bothered to be consistent, right?
But the modern world, with its mandatory state education and the commonality of working outside the home, mean that children grow up having few, and commonly no, opportunities for mentors.
Okay, advocacy for mentorship, I guess, because that's a thing. Not really sure why, but yeah, mentors.
Their teacher changes every year and their parents are tired from work when they are around. What are they to do when confronted with controversial ideas they're unequipped to decide for themselves? I strongly suspect that lack of belief atheism is one result. I'm not sure yet what other manifestations the situation has. Given the incredible similarities between lack of belief atheism and Christian fundamentalism, I strongly suspect that Christian fundamentalism is another result of this, but I haven't looked into it yet.
So the reason why this completely made-up straw man exists, and probably Christian fundamentalism, but I haven't looked into that. I don't know why. Just, I looked into this one thing, but not this other thing, that they're totally alike somehow, but I haven't looked into it, is because there's not enough mentors. That's why this thing that doesn't exist exists. Okay, why not? Sure, we just need more mentors.
This also suggests that the problem is not merely intellectual. That is, lack of belief atheists are probably not merely the victims of one bad idea. Having been deprived of the sort of stable role models that they should have had growing up, and not being able to find substitutes in great literature or make their way on their own through inspiration and native ability, they probably have also grown with what might be, by analogy, called a deformity in the organ of trust. They don't know who to trust, or how to properly trust. Some will imprint on the wrong sort of thing. I think that this is what produces science worshippers who know very little about science. But some of them simply become very mistrustful of everyone and everything. Now, I don't mean this as the only explanation of atheism, of course. For example, there are those who have so imprinted on the pleasure from a disordered activity that it's the only thing they can see as truly good in their life, and so its incompatibility with God leads them to conclude that God must not exist. There are also the atheist St. Thomas identified in the Summa Theologiae, those who disbelieve because of suffering and those who disbelieve because they think God is superfluous. But all these, I think, tend not to be lack of belief atheists, and I'm only here talking about lack of belief atheists. So finally the question becomes, what to do about lack of belief atheists? That is, how do we help them? I think that arguing with them is unlikely to bear much fruit, since most of what they say isn't what they mean, and what they do mean is largely unanswerable.
Don't bother arguing. They have already made up their mind. I've heard that before. And, oh yeah, by the way, even if you did argue with them, what they mean isn't really what they mean. So they don't even know what they're arguing in the first place, so don't bother. I've heard this before. It is complete and utter nonsense. Not only should you debate, because debate serves a broader function than just convincing your opponent that they're wrong, it also serves to educate the public at large, and is therefore then subject to more analysis, like I'm doing with your pathetic video here, which has failed at every conceivable level to give us anything worthwhile to really consider. There isn't this straw man, made up, lack of belief atheist in the way that you have described it. But yes, people do lack a belief in God because there's no evidence for it. So just give us the evidence. No, instead, you're gonna pontificate on what possible motives they might have, even though that's irrelevant, unknowable, would require special knowledge to know it, and even if you did know it for certain and could show it for certain, would be nothing more than an ad hominem at best.
I don't know who to trust, or I won't trust anyone or anything, can only be answered by a very long time of being trustworthy, probably for multiple decades. What I suspect is likely to be a catastrophic failure is any attempt to be welcoming or accommodating or inclusive. What lack of belief atheists are looking for, and possibly think they found already in the wrong place, is someone trustworthy who knows what they're talking about. A person who is accommodating or inclusive is someone who thinks that group bonds matter more than what they claim is true, which means that they don't really believe it. The problem with welcoming is the scare quotes. There's nothing wrong with being genuinely welcoming, since anyone genuinely welcoming is quite ready to let someone leave if he doesn't want to stay. When you add the scare quotes, you're talking about people who are faking an emotional bond, which doesn't exist yet, in order to try to manipulate someone into staying. Lack of belief atheists don't need emotional manipulation, because no one needs emotional manipulation. What they need are people who are uncompromisingly honest and independent. The lack of belief atheist is looking for someone to depend on, not someone who will depend on them. The good news is the same as the bad news. The best way to do this is to be a saint. That's all for now. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.
The best way to do this is to be a mentor. But not, you said mentor. That was what your argument was. There's not enough mentors. Is being a saint the same as being a mentor? What the bleep? You didn't even conclude with your own conclusion that you were arguing for. No. Atheists don't need somebody trustworthy or a mentor or whatever. Look, and even if they do, that's still irrelevant to the arguments, which stand or fail on their own, which you didn't attack at all at any point. Because you're too busy focusing on the construct straw man that you ad nauseum to us to death with. You did miss the mark. And I don't know if you did it deliberately or not, and I cannot know that. And I don't care. What I do know is you have numerous logical fallacies. And you have not presented us any empirical evidence, no test to run, and no logically coherent argument. And unless and until we have a logically coherent argument, we must continue to be skeptical of your conclusions. Please consider paying me so that I may continue to please you by presenting protecting videos, blocks, like Louis Castro, Hector Defendi, Joseph Schmidt, Godless Geezer, or Jacob Santos. These are all pleasing Patreon people. If you want to be a person that gets your pleasant name probably read at the end of my videos sometimes, then do that and click on the thing and stuff. And if you don't, then why not? Why don't you want that? That's a cool thing. And please help me out. Well, getting them out would be good. All right, that's all I got. Until next time, and lobsters exist. Here's a blooper. Why they did not present you with